In 2020, just outside of Washington, D.C., after over 230 years of operation, the last ferry on the Potomac River, crossing the Maryland and Virginia border, closed down due to a payment dispute between the ferry operators and the landowners on the Virginia side, with the landowners allegedly wanting a share of the profits from the ferry itself, while the ferry operators were only willing to give them a one-time payment to use the land. This resulted in a major transportation issue for the region, as the ferry had cut nearly 45 minutes to an hour off the commute time for anyone traveling between the two states, as the other nearest river crossings were two bridges nearly 50 miles apart from one another. For centuries, people have attempted to make the Potomac more navigable, from the native peoples to many early Americans, most notably George Washington, who had grown up along the banks of the river. He wished to connect the Potomac with the greater Ohio River basin through a series of canals to open up what was then the western frontier, to facilitate further trade and settlement of the interior of the continent. And while that didn't end up happening, he did oversee the construction of a series of canals along the banks of the Potomac River, which helped to ship materials down from the Appalachians to Georgetown, Alexandria, and eventually the US capital of Washington, D.C. But during this time, only a few permanent crossings were established across the river itself, in this section between Maryland and Virginia, with the vast majority of travel still being made through several formal and informal ferries. This is because, as opposed to building a bridge, which would have been expensive to properly engineer, construct, and maintain, it's simply much easier and cheaper to have a couple small rafts that could take people and goods across the river. Also, as transit and trade routes changed over time, ferries could be more easily relocated as opposed to relocating a bridge. There are also the issues with the legal disputes that occurred between the states of Maryland and Virginia about who had ownership over the river itself, with Virginia claiming to have the rights due to a 1609 charter from King James I of England, which was so vague that it would have made Virginia look something like this, while a more specific charter from 1632 from King Charles I drew the boundary for Maryland from the Potomac River. After some arbitration mediated by George Washington at Mount Vernon, the states eventually agreed to give the Potomac to Maryland, but to allow Virginia the right to navigate the river. Later on, during the Civil War in the 1860s, as the Potomac River was transformed into the front lines between the United States and the Confederacy, many of the few existing bridges were either destroyed or sabotaged as a result of the fighting, making ferries even more important during this time. Today, the remnants of the old ferry lines can still be seen in the landscapes, with several old roads extending out from nearby towns before abruptly stopping along the banks of the Potomac River, where the old ferries used to be. Recently, there have been negotiations from the landowners, ferry operators, and the local governments from both sides to try to get the ferry open again, but no agreements have been made yet, so it looks like the detours would have to do for now. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to have a say in any future content, please consider joining the Patreon. And I hope to see you next time.